beautiful.
Hello, lovers of the world. This is Sinta speaking. I really love Agatha Christie. I am a certified Agatha Christie girly pop, and she is definitely one of my favorite authors ever. However, lately, I have been trying to expand my reading horizons, and so even though I really love kind of her style of making murder mysteries, I thought that it would be really good to kind of look at her contemporaries from that time period, and that has kind of yielded to varying degrees of success. I kind of had this goal like way before, but I never followed through. One of the very few dedicated book reviews I have on my channel is about the Wintringham mystery, written by Anthony Berkeley, and I really loved that, so it gave me enough hope to pursue reading more of the golden age detective writers of that era. And I even own a handful of books from Agatha Christie's contemporaries. I have a lot of Georgette Heyer books, 2 copies of New Zealand's very own Nell Marsh, and of course I have some Dorothy L Sayers books. I went into reading Whose Body not really planning on making a dedicated video about it. I thought that I would probably put that review with a bunch of other books into like one big long video, but when I finished Whose Body, I realized that Peter Wimsey deserves more of my time and energy than I initially suspected. I ended up enjoying the book. I decided to kind of make a project out of it. The Peter Wimsey series is only 11 books long with some short story collections. Unlike Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot series, I'm going to read the Peter Wimsey series in order, unlike in Hercule Poirot where I feel like you can kind of just pick up whenever you want, and the fact that there's like 33 books, standalone novels feature him, I feel like it's a lot easier to read out of order, which I've been doing. If you follow up on my other videos, you can tell that I've been reading and picking random titles depending on how the blurb sounds, but not this one. I'm reading it from when it was first written to the very end, because there is a romance between Peter Wimsey and his future wife Harriet that kind of needs to be read in a specific order so you kind of understand their relationship better. I don't have a physical copy of Whose Body, which is the first book of the Peter Wimsey series, so I listened to the audiobook instead. I vaguely remember the story because I actually listened to the BBC radio show adaptation of the book that was available on Libby. I highly recommend using Libby, by the way. It's an online service that connects to your own library account and allows you to borrow ebooks and audiobooks that way. Every book I've talked about in my YouTube channel, I owe entirely because of Libby. I cannot overstate how useful and really convenient this website is, so I hope you guys check it out. Anyway, plenty of spoilers ahead in this video, by the way. I want to talk about anything and everything that I liked and disliked about the book, and since this is a murder mystery book, I will of course reference who the killer is, so proceed with caution in this video. If you don't want any spoilers, I really wouldn't recommend watching my video. Now let's get into my review / analysis / observations about the book. Lord Peter Wimsey is an aristocrat, and as the younger son who doesn't have a lot of responsibilities, he relishes in his life of leisure. Lord Peter Wimsey involves himself in this investigation when one of his acquaintances, Mr. Thipps, finds a body in his bathtub, and the police suspect Mr. Thipps of being the killer. It is very clear to the reader that that's very unlikely, but the police are kind of painted as cartoonishly incompetent to the point that Peter has to step in to make sure that they don't accidentally convict the wrong person. Fair enough premise, very standard. The body that they find in Mr. Thipps' bathtub is suspected to be Mr. Reuben Levy, a banker that was announced missing at the same time as the body had been found, and the body bore enough superficial resemblance to Reuben Levy that the police are convinced that the body and Mr. Levy are the same person, basically. However, when Peter Wimsey manages to inspect the body, he finds enough clues that point to the contrary. So, the mystery of the book at this point forward is to find out whose body is this, and 2, where is Reuben Levy? The victim, Reuben Levy, is a Jewish banker, and boy, does the book not let you forget that. The victim is not painted in a particularly demonic light. In fact, it's very sympathetic to him and kind of talks about how sad it is that he's been killed quite later on in the book. But at the same time, it's kind of like, oh, I don't know about the way that the characters kind of talk about him is very like clearly anti-Semitic. And I understand that this is of its time, I guess. But I am just surprised at how thick and palpable the anti-Semitism is. As I mentioned earlier, I did listen to the BBC radio show adaptation of this, and I honestly don't remember it being this bad. So either the BBC radio show adaptation takes it out because it's really not that important to the plot, and of course over time that level of anti-Semitism is just like not as accepted, or I had just completely blocked it out of my memory and that's why I don't remember it. Regardless, it is a bit weird and jarring to kind of read to that section where the Duchess of Denver, aka Lord Peter Wimsey's mom, talks about Reuben Levy, the victim, and it's just like weird encounter it now in our present day. Anyway, I just had to point it out because yeah, it's weird. Not to bring Agatha Christie up again, but in Agatha Christie books, there are lots of instances where the aristocracy's power is waning, or that there are large socioeconomic shifts that push the plot of the books forward in some way that involved the aristocracy. Seeing that she continued to write well into the 1960s, she incorporates a lot of these changes in the culture that she's witnessed into the plots of her books. So I was really curious as to whether Dorothy L Sayers would do anything of the sort with Wimsey in the coming books. But at this point in the series, in this particular book, the world kind of bends around Lord Peter Wimsey's whims in a way that is a little bit unbelievable by today's standards, but I think that's kind of the point of him being an aristocrat. Wimsey is definitely a perfect name for this character. He's got a very jovial personality and he has a kind of boyish charm to him, even though he's like, I think in his 30s at this point. On one hand, I found myself liking him, but on the other hand, it is really easy to see why other people wouldn't like him. I think he's a touch too carefree about life and about murder. You can also really tell that he doesn't care about justice for the dead man, with the very glib way that he talks about the dead body as if it's nothing more than a quirky puzzle and not like a dead body, like a man who was alive and now is dead. It is pretty clear that he does his sleuthing and his detective work less because of his own particular moral compass or a sense of justice that he has, and more because he finds the activity a fun pastime. It definitely doesn't like hit him until later on in the book. But of course, this light-hearted tone is very intentional and the book kind of leans into the comedy of it. But nonetheless, it is a little off-putting. It was hard for me to immerse myself in the story at first. I did think it had something to do with the audiobook that I chose and the voice actor's delivery, and maybe I'll have more luck with the tone of the book when I read it on paper. And as I said, it's not until halfway through the book that he kind of seems to realize the gravity of the situation he's in and becomes more reflective of his situation as an outsider investigating this murder. And it's honestly quite satisfying when Parker chastises him for not taking the investigation too seriously. It's the point where Peter realizes that this is only fun for him because he is not relying on this investigation for an income in the same way that the police or even Parker is relying on this case, or that his freedom is not on the line in the same way that Mr. Thipps's freedom is on the line. Over time, I did end up settling into the humor of the book. The court proceedings of Mr. Thipps leans into the absurd, which I thought was quite funny. And by the time that Wimsey had to rush to the meal with his mom and Mr. Milligan, I've pretty much loosened up. My favorite joke in the book is probably when Bunter, who is Wimsey's manservant, is trying to get information from this other guy, and in order to get the manservant to keep spilling the beans, Bunter pretends to share information about Wimsey so that the other guy will feel comfortable enough to share secrets about his employer. The way that Bunter does this is the manservant goes, "Oh, my employer, I can't believe that he has these guests that come in at all night, all sorts of gentlemen coming in and out. It's so weird." And then Bunter's like, "Oh, at least your employer only has gentlemen." Kind of insinuates that Peter Wimsey has like women coming into his manor and like is kind of like a playboy. And I thought that was really funny. I don't know why. Speaking of which, Bunter is actually kind of an interesting character as well. The backstory between him and Peter Wimsey is that they met during World War I. And so when the war was over, Wimsey gave Bunter a job as his manservant. And we only find out about this history in chapter 8. This is basically the part where I decided that, I actually want to make a bigger video about this book. In chapter 8, Peter Wimsey has this epiphany while reading a book that makes him realize who the murderer is, which is Dr. Julian Freak. but the excitement overwhelms him and it basically triggers a psychotic episode where he hallucinates that he and Bunter are back in the trenches. And this display of PTSD was so fascinating to kind of read. I feel like when I read it, it recontextualized him as a character, and I feel like I've been completely won over on his side. It also recontextualizes the relationship between him and Bunter. In the first half of the book, he was kind of just like a manservant who followed Peter Wimsey's orders. Bunter cares about propriety way more than Lord Peter Wimsey does, which I think makes for a really funny dynamic. But then you realize that, oh, they were in the war together, and the way that Bunter cares for Peter Wimsey after he has this PTSD episode just warmed my heart a little bit. It made me curious whether or not we will see more of this relationship kind of play out in the later books. It made me realize that underneath the gaiety of Peter Wimsey are mental scars from the war that are not so easily forgotten. And I really appreciated how it was depicted in the story, because not only, again, does it add character depth and relationship depth, it was also used to move the plot forward. This PTSD episode became an excuse to talk to Dr. Freak, who Peter realizes is the killer, and he uses this PTSD episode as a way to confront Dr. Freak. And there's this part in the book where Peter Wimsey is in the waiting room and he interacts with the other patients of Dr. Freak. This mother praises Dr. Freak for the treatment of her child, and I feel like when you read this passage, you as a reader will have one of two initial responses. The first is you realize that perhaps the doctor, despite being incredibly ruthless when they kill someone, could still care for his patients and do good things for them. On the other hand, it's kind of chilling how the people we can praise and the people who do good things for us can still turn out to be sinister after all. You can't really trust anybody because anybody can be a murderer. And then the book ends with Peter Wimsey reading out a letter sent to him by Dr. Freak that explains in excruciating detail how he killed this victim. Now, I kind of thought this part was a bit long-winded, and maybe it's because personally, I'm just not really pedantic about specific details on the murderer's part, but I guess this section was necessary to illustrate the kind of person Dr. Julian Freak actually was, proud enough of himself to write out in excruciating detail how he did his thing because he's so proud of himself that he nearly got away with it. And there is something kind of grotesque with how Dr. Freak explains in a very clinical and detached way how he enacted his murder and how he operated on the victim's body. And there's a very short blink if you miss it moment where Inspector Sugg, the police officer, actually walked in on Dr. Freak operating and dissecting Levy. It gave me a very visceral reaction, and I'm pretty sure that was the point, right? Dr. Julian Freak as a character is kind of interesting because it was very explicit in the book that he believed in this concept that one's conscience or one's evilness could be surgically removed, and that concept that theory that he came up with played a huge role in his motivations for killing Reuben Levy. While it seemed that he killed Levy because he was actually in love with Levy's wife and she chose to marry Levy instead over Freak, I interpreted it more that Dr. Freak just wanted to experiment and test his theories on someone he didn't think deserved to live, and the fact that the person he decided to experiment on was Jewish kind of I don't know, makes me feel a certain type of way. Anyways, despite all of that, I did enjoy this book. I think the writing style will take some getting used to, but it's not a big deal. I think I'll have more success when I read it in a physical copy. That's basically all I have to say about the book. I hope my ramblings made sense. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you want to see more of my work, and also so that you don't miss out on when I review the next book of the Lord Peter Wimsey series, Clouds of Witness. Please let me know what you think of Lord Peter Wimsey or Dorothy L Sayers in the comments. I feel like I don't see nearly as much about her here in BookTube, so it would be really cool if I could hear more about what you guys think. All my social media links are down in the description if you want to follow me there, alongside my Patreon and Ko-fi pages if you guys want to support me financially. I can't wait to share my love with you again next time. See you soon!